When my daughter told me to go find another place to die, that I was no longer of any use, I gathered my belongings like the dutiful mother I had always been. 3 days later, I found myself in a lawyer's office, realizing that the man I thought was a devoted husband had been playing the longest chess match of his life. Victoria was about to discover that, in the right moment, even a pawn can rise to become the queen. 2 months earlier, I was Eleanor Bennett wife for 43 years, a woman who would have given the shirt off her back for the people she loved. When Thomas collapsed at 71 and never breathed again, I thought the world had lost its color. I expected sorrow, the long, dull ache that follows losing a partner. I did not expect a vulture in stilettos. My daughter, Claire, arrived like she belonged in someone else's life. Polished, quick-smiling, wearing a practiced sympathy that slid off her like perfume. "Mom, you can't possibly manage this place alone," she said, with the kind of concern that smells faintly of calculation. The stairs, the yard, the maintenance, she listed it like a realtor selling a condo. "It's not healthy for you. You should consider a community where there are people your age, activities, no responsibilities." Her words were soft, the meaning blunt. No inheritance to split, no inconvenient mother underfoot. Claire had always been Thomas's favorite, his little bright thing who could do no wrong in his eyes. She'd married Mark, an investment banker with a clean haircut and a cleaner suit. They produced children, by which I mean they produced future problems. After the funeral, their helpfulness turned relentless. They brought brochures and pamphlets for retirement communities to family dinners, pressed them into my hands like invitations, as if asking me to step off the map of their lives. "You'd be happy, you'd meet people, you wouldn't have to deal with taxes or repairs." Translated, "We'd have everything without you." 6 weeks after Thomas died, Claire and Mark showed up unannounced with 2 large suitcases as if they were moving in for a summer. They crossed the threshold like landowners. Mark smiled politely. Claire, with the practiced half-arch of her eyebrow, announced, "We've decided to move into this house. Mark got the promotion. This property fits our needs." I stared as if the walls could explain themselves. "But this is my home," I said. Her smile slipped just long enough to show a razor. "Actually, Mom, according to Dad's will, I inherited everything." She said it like delivering a weather report. "We've been letting you stay here out of kindness, but it's time for you to find your own place." Those words hit like a fist. 43 years condensed into 3 little words. Just the wife. The killing blow came next. "Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now." They left me with 2 suitcases and a small box of photos, as if I were a thing they'd return to the attic when convenient. Mark loaded the bags into their town car with the polite speed of someone throwing out last season's merchandise. "You'll love your independence," he said, avoiding my eyes. That night, they dropped me off at a roadside motel called the Sunrise Lodge, $49 a night. The kind of place where the carpet remembers cigarette burns and the soap is economy-sized. Claire handed me 20 bills like a tip. "This should get you through a few nights," she said. "I'll transfer some money later once we handle Dad's paperwork." It was absurd and ceremonial. The woman who had made that house a home, the woman who'd thrown birthday parties, mended, scraped knees, nursed Thomas through cancer scares and sleepless nights, was now an uncomfortable, temporary item to be managed. Lying on that sagging mattress, I let memory run wild. Thomas had been meticulous. He'd fussed over documents, sworn to me he'd made his affairs plain. The thought that he would leave me destitute felt wrong on a molecular level. I picked up the motel Wi-Fi and looked up his old attorney's number. James Carter, the man who'd handled our house purchase and seemed to have a permanent line for Thomas's paperwork. The next morning, I rode the bus downtown. There was no pride in the transit fare, only necessity, and climbed the polished steps to James Carter's office. He greeted me with the kind of surprise you offer a good friend you didn't expect to see. "Eleanor, I was wondering when you might come by," he said, with an odd mixture of warmth and concern. I told him about Claire's announcement. He frowned, took a deep breath, and reached for a thick, leather-bound file. "Eleanor, that can't be right," he murmured. But the paper told its own story. Thomas's neat script at the bottom, witnessed and notarized. James read the will aloud, and my world reorganized itself line by line. Our house, my home, was left to me, 70% of the financial assets were bequeathed to me, approximately $23 million. $10 million was set aside for Claire, but crucially, it was placed in trust with a condition. Distributions begin on her 45th birthday only if she treats me with respect and dignity after Thomas's death. If she failed, that $10 million reverted to me. I remember the paper shaking in James's hands. "Your husband updated his will 6 months before he passed," he told me. "He was concerned about entitlement. He wanted to protect you." The room tilted. The meaning was crystalline and cruelly ironic. Claire's eagerness to seize had already created the circumstance that would strip her of the prize. "So she lied," I said, barely a whisper. "She moved in, told me I had nothing. She gave me money like I was a hotel maid." James's jaw tightened. "What she did is elder abuse and fraud if those documents are forged." He told me there were suspicious papers Claire had shown me that didn't match the notarized will. He made a call, and by that afternoon, banks were notified, accounts were flagged, utilities were suspended pending verification. Detective Alvarez arrived, looking tired and efficient. She examined the documents, turned them in her hands, and said the 2 words you never want to hear: "We'll investigate." Within hours, the life Claire thought she'd secured started collapsing. Her cards started declining, transfers bounced. I remember her call at precisely 3:47 p.m., her name a bright flash on my phone. "Mom, where are you? There's some mix-up with the bank. They're saying Dad's assets are frozen." Her voice clicked between panic and forced composure. "I'm in James Carter's office," I said. "The man who read the will to you while you told him I was traveling." A silence, a stammer, a flurry of excuses. "I was protecting you. You couldn't handle the money." "You forged legal papers," I said simply. "You threw your mother out. You committed fraud." Even as she begged, her tone tried to slope back into manipulation. "I don't know what you think you discovered. It's all a misunderstanding." But Detective Alvarez had already told me the forgeries were sophisticated. They weren't amateur hour, they had the hallmarks of people who knew where to find signatures, who could make a document look like history. That evening, Claire was arrested at a restaurant where she'd been celebrating with Mark and friends. She screamed about being victimized, cried about a mistake, standard theater for the desperate. Mark, pale and fumbling, was picked up at his office the next morning after a forensic accountant traced the forged paperwork to a printing company tied to his firm. I slept in my own master bedroom for the first time in weeks, while the house still smelled faintly of the perfume Claire had left behind. I packed her things into trash bags and set them on the porch for her to collect, when and if she posted bond. The comfortable assumptions I'd held about my marriage began to wobble. For decades, I'd been kept out of certain conversations, investments, trusts, business lunches, discreetly nudged aside with a smile. Did that mean I had been purposely excluded, or was I simply given the courtesy of ignorance? It didn't matter now. The facts on paper spoke louder than the family myths. As the days passed, James called regularly with updates. Claire's bail was set, Mark's higher. The news vans smelled blood. Channel anchors called with velvet voices, asking if I'd talk about elder financial abuse. A producer named Janet Cooper left messages. The humiliation of being publicly discussed while your child's name runs through headlines is a new kind of grief. But it came with an unexpected undercurrent: clarity. For the first time in decades, I began to see the household not as an endless service to someone else, but as a place I could remake. Then came a second, more bewildering turn. While James and Detective Alvarez were building the case against Claire and Mark, his private investigator Rachel Lynn, a hawk-eyed woman with a habit of rifling through boxes until they gave up their secrets, began to pull at threads in Thomas's business files. At first, I thought it would be a boring exercise in bank statements and receipts. Instead, she found payments to shell companies, invoices for phantom consulting, and contracts with entities that seemed to exist only on paper. Rachel came back into the study one night with her face set. "Eleanor, this isn't small-time bookkeeping," she said. "This looks like laundering." I laughed in a way that tasted like a cough. "Thomas? A man who loved his lawn and his watch collection?" The papers were relentless. Payments timed with known transactions from organized groups, contracts with companies that didn't have offices. It made no sense. Then the knock came from a different authority. Agent Maria Ortega from the FBI sat across from me in James's conference room with a folder that rattled like a threat. She looked unromantic and competent and far less interested in my domestic tragedy than in patterns. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, "we need to talk about Mr. Bennett's operations." Her words struck like cold rain. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Your husband worked as a deep cover informant for over a decade." Agent Ortega's voice never rose, but it carried a world of consequences. He was cooperating with our office while appearing to facilitate transactions. "The money you've been told about, some of it came through criminal channels, yes, but under federal supervision as part of an ongoing investigation. The funds were sometimes used to maintain his cover." My brain tried to assemble this new map. Thomas, who took me to Bridge Club and tacked reminder notes to the fridge, a man who loved thunderstorms and informant? The details that followed felt like a fever dream. 47 arrests in a complex years-long sting, funds moved under supervision to preserve cover, evidence gathering that required secrecy. Agent Ortega explained that the investigation was sensitive and compartmentalized. Thomas had kept as much of the burden to himself as he could. He'd not wanted to endanger us by telling us what he knew. It was stunning and absurd to feel vindicated in the very thing that frightened me. The money, our money, the house, the accounts, their provenance mattered. Agent Ortega's report meant that the $33 million was legally recoverable. Thomas's cooperation strengthened our claim rather than weakened it. In a twist that felt almost comic, Claire's attempts to seize and blackmail were precisely the lever Thomas had prepared for. His will, the trust condition, the recorded messages he'd left just in case someone tried to ruin me. Confronted by this, Claire tried new angles. She offered negotiations, a hush money settlement, an attempt to make everything go away. Mark's mother, Patricia Wynne, came by with a silk smile and a white-gloved handshake, offering $2 million to walk away. She called it a practical solution. "Let's avoid a scandal," she cooed, like a weather report for ruined reputations. I sat with the offers and found I had new tastes. $2 million for silence, for the possibility that Mark might continue to walk free. The idea made my stomach turn. Justice isn't a ledger you balance against social discomfort. $2 million to pardon complicity? No. $5 million? Still no. Their counsel tried to wave at bargaining chips. Allegations about Thomas's business, shadowy claims that they could muddle the waters. The threats masked a deeper fear. If those dirty papers came to light, reputations on both sides could sink. In the weeks that followed, Claire and Mark's legal houses crumbled. The forensic accountants traced printing orders, the digital fingerprints, the contacts. The arrests were public and humiliating. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, elder abuse, attempted extortion, all the things you imagine only happen in movies or the daytime news until they happen to you. Even then, the story kept deepening. It turned out Thomas had been both a flawed man and a man with a plan. He had anticipated greed. He had structured protections in his will meant to trigger on cruelty. That contingency was clumsy and poetic in equal measure. The man who had loved his daughter enough to see her as both bright and dangerously entitled had made safeguards where love failed. When the media pummeled at my door, I gave a few statements. I spoke about elder abuse, about the thin line between mercy and manipulation. The interviews were odd, alchemy, humiliation, melted into a platform. Channel anchors used my 80s of life as a cautionary tale, and advocates reached out. I found myself agreeing to a sit-down, if only to give voice to others. I'd met women who'd been quietly squeezed out by children seeking security. If my story could stop one other elderly person from an early eviction, why not tell it? There were darker nights. After the arrests, Mark's world of contacts threatened the edges of my life. He reached for potentials, people who weren't fond of federal scrutiny. Agent Ortega warned me not to go walking in the dark alone, to be cautious about surprise visitors. I felt simultaneously proud and fragile. Proud because I had refused to be erased. Fragile because the price had been family and the certainty that some loves are conditional. Time moves oddly in the aftermath of scandal. The months that followed included court dates and depositions, an early plea and negotiations. Claire's letters from jail, she wrote 17 of them, arrived like small, wet stones on the doormat. The first few were rationed pleas and self-justifications. By the 10th, her tone shifted to something that felt like regret. But there are breaks in human trust that words cannot mend. I read a few and stopped when I realized I was letting the past pull me back into its gravity. The house changed. I made small rebellions. I let in light. I tore down curtains that had been chosen to match someone else's taste. I converted Thomas's study into a bright art studio. A painter's easel now stands where once sat a mahogany desk for deals. I take the mail myself. I plant azaleas where a rose bush once stood dead with neglect. A neighbor dropped off a tray of warm bread. A granddaughter, one of Claire's children, visited under supervision and painted a sun badly in my kitchen and left with flour on her nose. The house is not whole, but it is mine in a practical, daily way. Generosity reshaped itself inside me too, with advice from Rachel and James, and guidance from Sarah Lynn, a new financial advisor who felt like a map. I set up a modest foundation focused on elder protection. 15 million of the inheritance went toward legal aid, toward hotlines and educational campaigns, so other elders would know what warning signs to look for. It felt right in a way that revenge never had. The press labeled me a philanthropist. I preferred the quieter title, someone who wouldn't be pushed aside. In quieter hours, I confronted what the whole mess had taught me. Thomas had been smarter and more complicated than the simple stories I'd told myself to sleep at night. He had loved us, but he had also carried secrets. Claire had been capable of great cruelty, and yet she was my blood. I choose boundaries over breaking. I choose safety and dignity over a forced forgiveness. She will pay the legal price for her choices, which are her burden to carry. A few months after everything settled into its new grooves, a producer from a streaming service called. They wanted to adapt the tale into a limited series. I laughed until I cried, and then said I would consider it if the proceeds could help fund elder advocacy. An odd capstone, our private disaster reframed as cultural spectacle. I said yes with conditions. People ask me now, sometimes with pity and sometimes with awe, if I regret pursuing justice, if I regret phone calls that led to arrests or the public humiliation that followed. My honest answer is complicated. I grieve the daughter I thought I had, but I do not regret standing up for myself. There is a strange grace in the hard decision to stop being a passive character in your own life. The mornings are gentler now. I make my coffee at a counter I chose. The studio windows open properly. I paint when the light is right and give the small canvases to local charities to fund elder legal work. The foundation's first scholarships went to women whose names I'd never known. Their gratitude washed something in me clean. If the thing I learned could be put on a single line, it would be this: dignity matters more than blood claims. There is a point where love should protect, not devour. Thomas's chess game, planned, precise, sometimes secretive, saved me, not because it was cruel, but because it was wise. He had foreseen appetites and made provisions. He had the imagination to protect a future I couldn't yet imagine. Claire writes from time to time, asking for forgiveness, for a place in a life I'm building. I answer that some doors remain closed, others might one day open on terms that show a real change. I do not promise anything I cannot keep. When I walk through the garden in the late afternoon and see the azaleas sway, I sometimes think of the young woman who told me to find somewhere else to die. I think of the steel that sat beneath the varnish in my husband's plans, the legal technicalities he left like a net. I think of how life can, paradoxically, reward patience and discernment. So yes, the pawn became the queen. The pieces we are dealt do not determine the game entirely. Sometimes, with a careful hand and an honest eye, you can play to checkmate the forces that think they can erase you. If you are in a room right now where someone makes you feel small, remember the will to be yourself. There is a kind of power in refusing to be invisible. Thanks for listening. If this story matters to you, tell someone you love about it. Share it. Protect your elders. And if you want more stories like this, lessons hard-won and not prettified, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Your voice matters.